Refresh. I think it should be back up. We actually, I don't know if you can hear
Yeah,
me,
we already
Autumn,
did that.
but we already did that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Okay.
I don't know where it cut off, so.
Just start at I had a job as a waiter.
All right. I had a job as a waiter on the Michigan Central Railroad at the time. In July, I was working the Wolverine, the crack Michigan Central Station train between Chicago, New York. We would serve lunch and dinner on the run out of Chicago to St. Thomas, Canada, where the dining car was cut off the train. The next morning, our cars would be attached to the Chicago-bound train, and we would serve breakfast and lunch into Chicago. On July 27th, the Wolverine left on a regular run to St. Thomas, passing through Detroit. We heard news that a race riot had broken out in Chicago. The situation had been tense for some time. Several members of the crew, all of them black, had bought revolvers and ammunition the previous week, then on a special to Battle Creek, Michigan. Thus, when we returned to Chicago at 2 p.m. the next day, July 28th, we were apprehensive about what awaited us. The whole dining car crew, 6 waiters and 4 cooks, got off at the 12th Street station in Chicago. Usually, we would stay on the car while it backed out into the yards, but the station seemed a better route now. We were all tense as we passed through the station on the way to the elevator which would take us to the south side and home. Suddenly, a white tradesman accosted us. "Hey, you guys going out to the south side?" "Yeah, so what?" I said, immediately on the alert, thinking he might start something. If I were you, I wouldn't go by the avenue. He meant Michigan Avenue, which was right in front of the station. Why? There's a big race riot going on out there, and already this morning a couple of colored soldiers were killed coming in unsuspectingly. If I were you, I'd keep off the street and go right out of these tracks by the lake. We took the tradesman's advice, thanked him, and turned toward the tracks. It'd be much slower walking home, but if he were right, it would be safer. As we turned down the tracks toward the south side of the city, towards the Black Ghetto, I thought of what I had just been through in Europe, and what now lay before me in America. On one side of us lay the summer warmness of Lake Michigan, and on the other side was Chicago, a huge and still growing industrial center of the nation, bursting at its seams, brawling and sprawling, Chicago. Hog butcher for the nation, as Carl Sandburg had called it. As we walked, I remembered the war. On returning from Europe, I had felt good to be alive. I was glad to be back with my family, mom, pop, and my sister. At 21, my life lay before me. What should I do? The only trade I had learned was waiting tables. I hadn't even finished the 8th grade. Perhaps I should go back to France, live there and become a French citizen? After all, I hadn't seen any Jim Crow there. Had race prejudice in the U.S. lessened? I knew better. Conditions in the States had not changed, but we, blacks, had. We were determined not to take it anymore. But what was I walking into? South side of Chicago, the Black Ghetto was like a besieged city. Whole sections of it were in ruins. Buildings burned, and the air was heavy with smoke, reminiscent of the Holocaust from which I had recently returned. Our small band huddled like a bunch of raw recruits under the machine gun fire, turned up 26th Street and then into the heart of the ghetto. At 35th in Indiana, we split up to go our various ways. I headed for home at 42nd Place in Bowen. None of us returned to work until the riot was over. More than a week later.
Wow.
Mm. The battle at home was just as real as the battle in France it has been. As I recall, there was full-scale street fighting between black and white. Blacks were snatched from streetcars and beaten or killed. Pitched battles were fought in ghetto streets, hoodlums roamed in neighborhoods, shooting at random. Blacks fought back. So I'm gonna stop this right here for a quick second. What we're gonna be reading is gonna be a lot. There's gonna be lots of discussion of like hate crimes and well, as we're talking about right now, race riots. So if you can't sit here and listen to that, that's completely fine. You don't have to. And some of the although I already did read a good part of it, I'm willing to bet it's only not gonna it'll get worse in some parts. So full disclosure.
Yes, content warning.
hmm As I saw it at the time, Chicago was two cities. There was one. There was the Chamber of Commerce city of the American Miracle, the Chicago of the 1893 World Columbian Exposition. It was a new industrial city which had grown in pace from the frontier town to become the second largest city in the country. The other, the black community, had been part of the Chicago almost from the time the city was founded. Jean-Baptiste Pontin du Sablé, a black trapper from French Canada, was the first settler. Later came fugitive slaves, and after the Civil War, more blacks, fleeing from post-Reconstruction terror, taking jobs as domestics and personal servants.
Jeez.
The large increase was in the late 1880s through World War One. At 1880s through World War One, as industry in the city expanded and as blacks streamed north following the promise of jobs, housing, and an end to Jim Crow lynching. The Illinois Central tracks ran straight through the deep south from Chicago to New Orleans, and the Panama Limited made the run every day. Those that took the train north didn't find a promised land. They found jobs and housing all right, but they had to compete with the thousands of recent immigrants from Europe, who were also drawn to the jobs in the packing houses, stockyards, and steel mills. The promise of an end to Jim Crow was nowhere fulfilled. In those days, the beaches on Lake Michigan were segregated. Most were reserved for whites only. The 26th Street beach, close to the black community, was open to blacks, but only as long as they stayed on their own side. The riot had started at this beach, which was then jammed with a late July crowd. Eugene Williams, a 17-year-old black youth, was killed while swimming off the white side of the beach. The black community was immediately alive with accounts of what had happened. They had been while swimming. That a group of whites had thrown rocks at him and killed him, and that the policeman on duty at the beach had refused to make any arrests. The incident was a spark that ignited the flames of racial animosity which had been smoldering for months. Fighting blacks and whites broke out on the 26th Street beach after Williams' death. It soon spread beyond the beach and lasted over 6 days. Before it was over, 38 people, black and white, were dead. 537,000, 537, not thousand, sorry, 537 injured and over 1,000 homeless. The memory of this mass rebellion is still very sharp in my mind. It was a great turning point in my life, and I had dedicated myself to the struggle against capitalism ever since. In the 5 pages of my autobiography, I have attempted to trace the development of that struggle in the hopes that today's youth can learn from both our successes and failures. It is for the youth and the bright future of a socialist USA that this book had been written. So that is the end of the prologue. And that was just the introduction. So
Yeah.
you guys can imagine the kind of stuff is going to be talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, once again, we already said it a couple minutes ago. Heavy content warning. This is going to be taking place during America during Jim Crow, so you can imagine the subject matter that we talked about.
But it's also super fucking important, obviously. for
It's
us
important
to
to
kind
learn.
of
Yes.
bear through like this because they fucking lived through this, obviously. So
Well,
we all should really be listening to this.
mhm,
Sorry, but we should.
mhm. All right. You want to start with chapter one?
Sure, I can start. A child of slaves. I was born in South Omaha, Nebraska on February 4th, 1898, the youngest of three children of Harriet and Haywood Hall. Otto, my older brother, was born in May 1891, and Eppa, my sister, in December 1896. In 1890s, uh, the 1890s had been a decade of far-reaching structural change in the economic and political life of the United States. These were fateful years in which the pattern of 20th century subjugation of blacks was set. A young U.S. imperialism was ready in 1989 to shoulder.
1890.
Oh, Jesus, my 1898. What did I say?
Hold on.
Whatever I
Uh,
said.
you said 1989.
That's not the year.
Yeah, you flipped
1898.
the numbers.
Might be. Lenin was fond of saying, one fool can ask 10 times more questions than 10 wise men can answer."
Mhm.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do definitely deal with that. What were you going to say?
No, because I was just saying that jokingly you switched the numbers from
Oh, yeah.
1898 to 1989.
Yeah. Sorry. To shoulder its share of the white man's burden and take its manifest destiny beyond the Pacific coast and the Gulf of Mexico. In the war against Spain, it embarked on the first or on its first civilizing mission against colored peoples of Philippines and the oh god, I didn't even want to
Yeah,
say this stuff out loud. Like,
I'll say it.
okay, thank you.
Of the mixed breeds
Of
of Cuba and Puerto Rico,
yeah.
which, by the way, Puerto Rico, hey, shout out to half of my family.
In the course of the decade and a half following of Jesus, and half following the Spanish American War, the two faced banner of racism and imperialist benevolence was carried to the majority of the Caribbean countries and the whole of Latin America. The echo of this industrial imperialism in America, said W.E.B. Du Bois, was the expulsion of black men from American democracy, their subjugation to caste control, and wage slavery. In 1877, the Hayes-Tilden Agreement had successfully aborted ongoing democratic revolution of Reconstruction in the South. Blacks were sold down the river as northern capitalists, with the assistance of some former slaveholders, gained full economic and political control of the South. Henceforward, it was assured that the future development of the region would be carried out in complete harmony with the interests of Wall Street. The following years saw the defeat of the southern-based agrarian populist movement, with its promise of black and white unity and the power of monopoly capital. The counter-revolution against Reconstruction was in full swing.
Yeah, so you can like kind of talk about it right now, where you see a lot of liberals specifically talk about how the North was good, while it was the South, that had slaves. No, well, the North was making money off it too. That's how the United States made its money. It wasn't two separate countries. So, trying to separate them, like, yes, of course, in the Civil War, it was fought North and South, but let's not pretend like the North wasn't profiting off of slavery.
Right.
So creating acting like it is two different countries is just incorrect. They were the same country. Northern capitalists were making money off of the slaves in the South.
Beginning in 1890, the Southern state legislators enacted a series of disenfranchisement laws. Within the next 16 years, these laws were destined to completely abrogate the right of blacks to vote. The same period saw the revival of notorious black codes the resurgence of the hooded terror of the Ku Klux Klan, and the defeat for re-election in 1905 of the last black congressman surviving the Reconstruction period. Jim Crow laws enforcing segregation in public facilities were enacted by Southern states and municipal governments. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld Jim Crow in the Plessy v. Ferguson decision in 1896, declaring that legislation is powerless to eradicate racial instincts and establish the principle of separate but equal. What the fuck?
Mm.
This decision was only reversed in 1954 when the Supreme Court held that separate facilities were inherently unequal.
Yeah, so that's a funny thing to talk about. Because in high school, we kind of do get kind of taught this stuff, but it's so incredibly brief, and they go over so quickly. You're not going to remember actually learning this. You're not going to grasp just how horrible it was. And yeah, another thing that they don't really talk about is just how Abraham Lincoln wasn't this hero that he's made out to be. Yeah, if I could stop the war without freeing a single slave, I would. Yeah, yes, sure, he did enact the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves. At the end of the day, he was willing to not go through with it. And from what I can remember, he still did believe white people to be superior. And one of the things he talked about, I don't know if he actually decided to try to put this plan into action, but I do believe he maybe tossed around the idea of sending all the black people back, all the slaves back to Africa. So yes, Abraham Lincoln, although he's portrayed as this, or the one good Republican or whatever, even then he's still not that good. I guess if you want to say he would be the best Republican. But I mean, that's not a very high bar.
Yeah. I mean, it's why they paint FDR as fucking progressive.
Same goes to FDR, exactly. He's painted as this hero, oh yeah, he saved all those people, yeah, while he threw people into
saved capitalism.
Internment
camps.
What
he did.
He saved capitalism, exactly. And he killed the communist movement in America. And he made it weak, and it died off throughout the decades. Yeah, a lot of presidents want to send black folks back. Don't doubt it. We're just talking about how Lincoln is definitely portrayed as a hero of black people, and in reality, he's not. Yeah, so going over Black Bolshevik, this one might, not only because it's a really long book, it's really long, so that's why it would take a while, but also the fact that, this is a lot for a lot of the viewers here. It's our history. It's American history. So, we're going to obviously be, taking breaks and talking about, what we know and how we contribute to our own society. Because a lot of times when we read these books from theorists, we're reading from Germany or Russia, China. And, most of us aren't from there. A lot of people here are, watching the stream. A lot of us aren't from those countries. We're mostly here from America. So
and Brazil.
Reading from and Brazil, yeah, America and Brazil. So yeah, Black Bolshevik is going to be a lot easier for us to relate to, a lot easier for us to see. Like, yes, I can still see this. For example, I think the school I go to was once a Civil War base.
Jesus.
Yeah, and well, I'm in the South, so you can imagine what side they were on.
Yeah. Presidents are just the top cops. True.
Mm-hmm. All presidents are bad. APAB.
True. Big true. Hold on really
All
quick.
presidents are in hell or going to hell, if it's real.
Yeah, if hell is real, they're all there. For sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. At the time when I was born, the black experience was mainly a southern one. The overwhelming majority of black people still resided in the South. Most of the black inhabitants of South Omaha were refugees from the 20-year terror of the post-Reconstruction period. Omaha itself, despite its Midwestern location, did not escape the terror completely, as indicated by the lynching of a black man, Joe Coe, by a mob in 1891. Many people had relatives and families in the South. Some had trekked up to Kansas in 1879 under the leader of Henry Adams of Louisiana and Moses Pap Singleton of Tennessee, and many had continued further north to Omaha and Chicago. My parents were born slaves in 1860. 1860, wow. They were 3 years old at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation. My father was born on a plantation in Martin County, Tennessee, north of Memphis. The plantation was owned by Colonel Haywood Hall, whom my father remembered as a kind and benevolent man. When the slaves were emancipated in 1863, my grandfather, with the consent of Mr. Hall, took both the given name and the surname of his former master. I never knew Grandfather Hall, as he died before I was born. According to my father and uncles, he was, as they said in those days, much of a man. He was active in local Reconstruction politics and probably belonged to the black militia. Although Tennessee did not have a Reconstruction government, there were many whites who supported the democratic aims that were pursued during the Reconstruction period. But Tennessee was also the
I'm gonna read this paragraph.
Okay, go ahead. Oh yeah, you should definitely do that.
But Tennessee was also the home of the Ku Klux Klan, where it was first organized after the Civil War. In the terror that followed the Hayes-Tilden Agreement, these night riders had marked my grandfather as a bad nigger for lynching. At first, they were deterred because of the paternalism of Colonel Hall. Many of Hall's former slaves still lived in his plantation after the war ended, and the colonel had let it be known that he would kill the first son of a bitch that trespassed in the try to terrorize his negroes. But the anger of the night riders, strengthened by corn liquor, finally overcame their fear of Colonel Hall. My father, who was about 15 at the time, described what happened. One night the Klansmen rode onto the plantation and headed straight for the grandfather's cabin. He broke open the door, and one poked his head into the darkened cabin. "Hey, Hall's nigger, where are you?" My grandfather was standing inside and fired his shotgun point blank at the hooded head.
Oh shit.
The Klansman, half his head blown off, toppled onto the floor of the cabin, and his companions mounted their horses and fled.
Fuck. He fucking blew their head off.
Grandmother, then pregnant, fell against the bed. Oh, that's pretty hilarious. I mean, it's obviously terrifying. It's a terrifying thing that they had to... Yes, but the idea of a Klansman getting his head blown off and then all of them just like, all right, peace, I'm out. Just fleeing, running for their lives. Is absolutely hilarious to me.
The KKK
Yeah, don't mess with Grandpa.
They're pussies.
Yeah, that's why they hide behind the hood.
Right. Just be out with it, you fucking...
Yeah. And the fact that they're still around today. I mean, I'm sure if I drive like a couple hours from where I am, I could probably be in an area where they are. For example, when I was driving down to where I live now, I passed a place where I've seen Confederate flags just flying. I'm like, all right, well, I'm not stopping here. I'll just keep on driving through. So.
Yeah, I'm in Florida, so there's definitely Nazis and KKK afoot.
Mm-hmm.
I think our governor is a fucking...
Hey, new subscriber.
Thank you so much for subbing.
Thank you, Marnix, too. Right. So grandfather got the family out of the cabin, and they ran to the big house for protection. It was obvious they couldn't stay in Tennessee, so the colonel hitched up a wagon and personally drove them to safety outside the Martin County. Some of grandfather's family were already living in Des Moines, Iowa, so the Hall family left by train for Des Moines the following morning. The shock of this experience was so great, the grandmother gave birth prematurely to her third child. However, became a wait, became prematurely to their third child, my Uncle George, who lived to be 95.
Nice.
Grandmother, however, became a chronic invalid and died a few years later after the fight from Tennessee.
Beautiful.
Father was only in his teens when the family left for Des Moines, so he spent most of his youth there in the late 1880s. He left and moved to South Omaha, where he was more of a chance to get to work. He got a job at Chuday's Packing Company, where he worked for more than 20 years. First, as a beef lugger, loading signs of beef on refrigerated freight cars, and then as a janitor in the main office building. Not long after his arrival, he met and married mother, Harriet Thorpe, who had come up from Kansas City, Missouri, about the same time.
You want me to read?
Mm-hmm.
Father was powerfully built, of medium height, but with tremendous breadth. He had a 46-inch chest and weighed over 200 pounds. He was an extremely intelligent man with little or no formal schooling. He had taught himself to read and to write, and was a prodigious reader. Unfortunately, despite his great strength, he was not much of a fighter, or so it seemed to me. In later years, some of the old slave psychology and fear remained. He was an ardent admirer of Booker T. Washington, who, in his Atlanta Compromise speech of 1895, had called on blacks to submit to the racist status quo. Oh, wow. Uncle
Mm-hmm.
George was the opposite. He would brook no insult and had been known to clean out a whole bar room when offended. The middle brother, Watt, was also a fighter and was especially dangerous if he had a knife or had been drinking. I remember both of them complaining about my father's timidity. My mother's family also had great fighting spirit. Her father, Jerry Thorpe, was born on a plantation near Bowling Green, Kentucky. He was illiterate, but very smart and very strong. Even as an old man, his appearance made us believe the stories that were told of his strength as a young man. When he was feeling fine and happy, his exuberance would get the best of him, and he'd grab the largest man around, hoist him onto his shoulders, and run around the yard with him. Grandfather Thorpe was half Creek Indian and had an Indian profile with a humped nose and high cheekbones. His hair was short and curly, and he had a light brown complexion. He had a straggly white beard, and he tried to cultivate it into a Van Dyke. He said his father was Creek Indian and his mother was a black plantation slave. No one knew his exact age, but we made a guess based on the stories he often told us. He was about 6 or 7 years old when he said, "The stars fell." When was that, Grandpa? One night the stars fell. I remember it very clearly. The skies were all lit up by falling stars. People were scared almost out of their wits. The old masters and mistresses and all the slaves were running around the road, falling down on their knees and praying and asking forgiveness. We thought that Judgment Day had surely come. Glory, hallelujah! It was the last fire. The next day, the ground was all covered with ashes. At first, we had all thought that it was just his imagination, something he had fantasized as a child and remembered as a real event. But when my older brother Otto was in high school, he got interested in astronomy and came across a reference to a meteor shower of 1833. We figured out that that was what Grandfather Thorpe had been talking about, so we concluded that he was born around 1825 or 1826. Grandfather Thorpe was filled with stories, many about slavery. You want to start reading that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chillin'. I've got scars I'll carry to my grave. He would show us the welts on his back from slave beatings. My grandmother also had them. Most of his beatings came from his first master in Kentucky, but he was later sold to a man in Missouri, whom he said treated him much better. This may have been due in part to his value as a slave. He was skilled both as a carpenter and cabinet maker. Actually, there was a when before I moved to Texas. So as we were moving to Texas, our family we drove all the way from New York to Texas when we moved, and so it took us about 4 days. I was like 6 years old. I don't remember too much about it, but my parents remember when we stopped in a diner in Missouri. Of course, we walked in. We were the only black people there, and my parents said everybody was just staring at us. Like they were just having dead set, just staring at us. So we were walking to like a table, and after a while, my parents were like, forget it. Let's just get out of here. Just drove off.
Jeez.
hmm I don't remember too much because I was 6 years old. I'm not paying attention to other people. I'm like, man, I'm hungry.
Would you guys prefer to have this or this one? I'm changing the screen to see what they want. Do you want to read along like this, or do you just want us to read it? What do you like? What do you want?
Yeah.
Okay. Where were you
Just
at?
want to see what I know where I am. I was.
This one? Okay.
Yeah. Grandfather had many stories to tell about the Civil War. He was in Missouri at the time, living in an area that was first taken by a group known as the Quantrill's Raiders, a guerrilla-like band of irregulars who fought for the South, and then by the Union forces. When the Union soldiers first came into the plantations, they would call in slaves from the fields and make them sit down in the great drawing room of the house. They would then force the master and the mistress and their family to cook and serve for their slaves. Grandfather told us that the soldiers would never eat any of the food that was served because they were afraid of getting poisoned. The master on the plantation was generally decent when it became clear that the Union forces were going to control the area for a while. At that time, grandfather and my grandmother, Anne, lived on adjacent plantations somewhere near Morbely, Missouri. Grandfather was allowed to visit Anne on weekends, often on Sundays. When he went to make a visit, he was challenged by Union guards. They would roughly demand to know his mission. My grandfather and grandmother got married with the agreement of their two masters, and eventually had a family of 5 daughters and 2 sons. Grandfather Thorpe was given a plot of land in return for his services as a carpenter, but the family soon moved into Moberly. As the children reached working age, the family began to break up, but the girls always remained very close. They came back to visit frequently and never broke family ties as the boys had. My mother Harriet was born when grandmother was a slave on the plantation of Squire Sweeney in Howard County, Missouri. After the family moved to Moberly, mother worked for a white family in town. She later went to St. Joseph, Missouri to work for another white family. One day, while she was at work in St. Joseph, she heard a shot and then screams from down the street. She ran out to see what had happened. There was a great commotion, and a crowd of people was gathering in front of the house next door. The family living there went by the name of Howard, a man, a wife, and 2 children. Both the man and his wife were church members. They appeared to be a most respectable couple. Miss Howard, Miss Howard had been very active in church affairs and social. Her husband was frequently absent because she said he was a traveling salesman, and his work took him out of town for long periods of time. What the neighbors were not aware of was that Mr. Howard was none other than the legendary Jesse James. He was shot in the back while hanging a picture in his house. The man who killed him was Robert Ford, a member of Jesse's own gang who had turned traitor for a bribe offered by the Burns Detective Agency.
Damn.
When my mother did the laundry, I would remember she would often sing the Ballad of Jesse James, a song which became popular after his death. Jesse James was a man. He killed many a man. The man that robbed that Denver train. It was a dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard,
Hold on, let's see
and
if
they
we can
laid Jesse
find that.
James in his grave.
Let's see if we can find the Ballad of Jesse James.
Mhm. Oh, the people held their breath when they
Wait,
heard
I
of
found
Jesse's.
it. Hold
Oh, you
on.
did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on, let's see.
Yeah, I must well grab another water real quick.
Okay. Okay, let's see.
Jesse James was a lad who killed many men.
Is that what it says? Hold on, let's see.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Alright, this is it.
He robbed the Glendale train. He stole from the rich and he gave to the poor. He had hand and a heart and a brain. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life. 3 children, they were so brave. Robert Ford caught his eye and shot him on the sly.
This is the Ballad of Jesse James.
Jesse James in his grave. It was on a Wednesday night when the moon was shining bright. They robbed the Glendale train. And the folk from all about, they all said without a doubt, it was robbed by Frank and Jesse James. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life.
We don't have to listen to the whole thing, but yeah. That's what it says. Yep, okay.
In 1893, my mother went to Chicago to visit her sister and see the exposition. She said she saw Frank James, Jesse's brother. He was out of prison then, a very dignified old man with a long white beard. He had been hired to ride around as an attraction at one of the exhibits. Mother kept moving up the north by stages. After the job in St. Joseph, she found work in St. Louis. She arrived to find the city in a tense situation. The whole town was on the verge of a race riot. The immediate cause was the murder of an Irish cop named Brady. The black community was elated, for Brady was a nigger-hating cop who carved notches on his pistol to show the number of blacks he had killed.
Oh my god.
Brady finally met his end at the hands of a bad, quote-unquote, black man who had ran a gambling house in Brady's district. You know what? Good. Good.
Yes, and no one was sad.
No, I'm not. He was putting notches on his pistol to count the number of black people he was killing.
That's some, like, that's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whoever did kill him, hero.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It is disgusting.
Yeah. The gambling, of course, was illegal. But as was often the case, the cops were paid off with a cut from the takings of the house. As the story was told to me, Brady and the gambler met on the street one day and got into an argument. Brady accused the gambler of not giving him his proper cut.
Ha!
This was denied vehemently.
Pigs are so greedy.
Brady then threatened to close the place down. The black man told him, "Don't you come into my place when the game's going on." He then turned and walked off. The scene was witnessed by several blacks, and the news of how the gambler had defied Brady spread immediately through the black district.